I would like to say thank you so much to Jessi Parfait, who's going to be with us today, who will be our presenter with Enough, Louisiana's History and Continued Existence as an Extractive Colony. And she's going to be coming up in just a minute. And I'd also like to welcome Dr. Rachel, who is our new liaison with the Louisiana Folklore Society on our management team. But these four folks are the people who bring this program to you every month. This is sort of our disclaimer statement that we don't know all of the answers, nor do we support any particular strategy of how we're going to make it through what's ahead of us, but we feel as though together we're able to discuss those options and figure out the best path forward. These are our partners, the Folklore Society, Center for Bayou Studies, Louisiana Folklife Program, the Center for Louisiana Studies, and the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center. Of course, we can't do this without funding, and so we thank you to our generous funders, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Louisiana Office of Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, but it's the Louisiana Division of the Arts in particular. We're very thankful for that. And I would like to now pass it on to Maida to discuss a little bit about what's happening with her Pass It On workshops.
Yeah, I'm very pleased with all the Passing It On workshops that we've scheduled. We have dedicated all of the funds, so we're not taking more applications right now. And so hopefully next year we'll be able to offer more. And today I want to share with you about Mary V. Jackson. She worked with Jonathan Mayers, and they did a Creole storytelling workshop at the Point Coupee Library in New Roads. Very exciting. And there are quite a few other ones that are being planned. We even have a split oak basket making workshop, 5 consecutive days in May, and they've already got 15 people signed up. So that's very exciting. And I'm going to put in the chat where you can find out more information about these.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Maida. So this gives you a little bit of a rundown of our agenda today. We have Jessi Parfait, who will be our speaker. We'll have some time for some questions and answers, a discussion with her. We'll ask her what her hope for the coast is, and then we'll give a few updates about the position statement, our working groups. Anybody have any announcements? And then, of course, we have our informal discussion after the presentation until 1:30. So with no further ado, it is such a treat for us to have Jessi Parfait with us today. She's an anthropologist and registered member of the United Houma Nation and a brilliant, brilliant woman. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Jessi. And so I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. So Halito, my name is Jessi Parfait, and I want to start by saying thank you all for having me today. So let me start by saying I want to dispel this whole hunter-gatherer myth that all the indigenous people of this land were primarily hunters and gatherers. While that may have been true of some tribes, most people just traveled regionally and for hunting seasons in a lot of the same ways people do now. There were large settlements with monumental architecture like Cahokia, pictured here, and Poverty Point. But of course, because this is the Bayou Culture Collaborative, I want to focus a little more locally. There are only a handful of places in the entire world where monumental architecture predates agriculture, and Louisiana is one of those places. These are the mounds on LSU's campus. They're believed to be well over 5,000 years old. They are older than the pyramids of Giza and the oldest human-made structures on the North American continent. Now, I want you to understand that this is also not just like dirt piled up. This was engineered with layers of different materials stacked together that have lasted in what we all know can be a very volatile environment. And these aren't an anomaly here on the coast either. There's some further down the bayou, where I'm from, that have survived even harsher climates than Baton Rouge. Now, I say this to point out the fact that this land has been inhabited for so long. And in the case of the Mississippi River Delta, indigenous people have lived here for as long as land has been here. And for thousands of years, it was enough. The abundance provided by the river and the fertile soil of our coast was enough. But when colonization began, nothing would ever be enough again. In 1682, René de Beau Cavalier de La Salle claimed the entire Louisiana territory for King Louis XIV, naming it La Louisiane for France. At which time I can only imagine the indigenous people living here said, "What the hell is a France?" But my man said, "Nevertheless, this is France." For what it's worth, La Salle was later killed in a mutiny. But being a French colony meant that resources were taken from our land and shipped off to France. In fact, they were among the first to begin cutting down our virgin cypress trees, but a little bit more on that later. The first colonizer to run into my tribe, the Houma, was Henry de Tonty. When de Tonty encountered the Houma, we were about an hour, well, our primary settlement was about an hour north of present-day Baton Rouge, which we all know is French for red stick. But we also called it that. We called it the Itzi Houma. This was a literal red stick that separated our hunting grounds from those of the Bayou. The tribe was near what is present-day Angola and Tunica area, in the hills of the Houma, where we had over 100 cabins. Now, Louisiana traded hands many times before it became parts of America, and while it was Spanish, in 1774, the tribe sold our beautiful and fertile settlement to Maurice Conway and Alexander Latiel. That land is now called the Homa's House. We sold it for $150 in goods, or what the tour guides like to brag, must have been the deal of the century. Don't worry though, they kept the name and the artifacts, and the legal battles over that land lasted until 1866. We fought for that land for almost 100 years. I find a deep and painful irony that the lands my people called home and lived in so freely now contain the largest maximum security prison in the United States, which was named for the plantation that was once on the property. Our lands were taken from us to make way for plantations, and people were enslaved on our land. And then when that was abolished, as if they had not taken enough from this land and its people, one of the biggest petrochemical buildouts in the United States that continues to poison our air and our people for companies and funders, most of whom do not reside here and do not have to live with the consequences. Now, for those keeping track, Louisiana was French, Spanish, parts of it were British before becoming French again, which is hard for me to keep track of. And I have the ability to Google, so I can only imagine how the ancestors felt. But anyway, the last time it was French was enough. And old boy Napoleon Bonaparte here said, you know what? Never mind. This colony is more trouble than it's worth. And he sold the entire Louisiana territory in 1803 to Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers and writers of the Declaration of Independence, who in that very document called the indigenous people living in this land merciless Indian savages. Anyway, after this, Thomas Jefferson appointed this man named John Sibley as the Louisiana Indian agent to make a list of all the tribes because in the Louisiana Purchase, there was an article that stated the new United States government had to abide by any treaties made with tribes in the French or Spanish. By all accounts, this dude had no interest in actually doing his job. He already had land in the area and was a sketchy person in general, and wrote that my tribe scarcely existed as a nation, which was, of course, taken as gospel by Jefferson. After Sibley said we didn't exist, the United States had a really easy time claiming ignorance about us having any rights to land, so we were pushed out and headed south in the 1800s. One of the parishes a large portion of my tribe migrated to was Terrebonne. Terrebonne, of course, means good earth. We were alive and well and thriving in the good earth. The swamps protected us from forced Indian removal policy that forced our indigenous brothers and sisters onto reservations, where many still live today. They protected us from what indigenous people would face in the West, with the gold rush, which, if you didn't know, was literal bounty hunting. Bounty hunters were paid incentives of $10 to $25 for proof of dead Indigenous people. Scalps, heads, hands. These bounty hunters racked up a $1.5 million bill that the state of California paid and the United States government reimbursed. Children were taken from their homes in an effort to kill the savage, save the man. So things weren't perfect for us, but comparatively, we were pretty safe. Then oil and gas came to Terrebonne and Lafourche. Oil exploration began in Terrebonne Parish in the 1930s. The Texas-owned Louisiana Land and Exploration Company began exploring. And while oil exploration, when it began, it was like the gold rush in Louisiana, in the sense that everybody wanted a piece of Louisiana, a literal piece. The only problem being, of course, people were already on those pieces. My people who were denied an education, and it became pretty common practice to be handed something to sign that the industry called a lease, but was actually a bill of sale. I've even heard stories from my elders about people signing these bills of sales from beyond the grave. And when the land was theirs, the marsh buggies came in, canals were dredged, and the rigs came in. They destroyed our land and damaged our way of life while excluding us from all this new wealth that came to town, while our historic lands were being destroyed. Many people lost their land, farms, crops, and that trauma is still felt generations later. People still identify with the land that was taken from their ancestors, and because of coastal erosion expedited by oil and gas, a lot of it's not even land anymore. And because we were denied an education, there was little we could do to fight back. Now we all know the maps, the land loss maps and the future projected land loss maps, but what did it actually look like to Indigenous people? This is Wonder Lake, at one time a freshwater lake in Terrebonne Parish with a small tribal community near it at Point Barre. When the Molinaire family was approached by Humble Oil about selling their land, they refused, and in response, Humble Oil dug a 100-foot wide canal splitting Point Barre in half, piling the dirt as close to their property as possible, and inevitably having their land covered in oil. The canal introduced salt water into the area, and the family was eventually forced to relocate. But oil and gas wasn't even how Louisiana started as a sacrifice zone and an extractive colony. You can say it started with logging. Louisiana was once home to towering virgin cypress trees, some of which were well over 1,000 years old. Cypress logging and exportation began before America existed as a country, but experienced a boom in the late 1800s. That boom was all but over by 1925. In less than 50 years, logging destroyed an estimated 1.6 million acres of cypress bottomlands, leaving behind only one single virgin cypress tree in the entire state. As a result of this environmental degradation, the deep roots that stabilized cypress trees in the environment, again, prone to flooding, were no longer there to hold the soil together, further exacerbating land loss. So where do we go from here? First and foremost, I think it's important to recognize different types of knowledge. Just because someone doesn't have a degree or letters behind their name doesn't mean they don't know what's going on. Especially elders who have spent decades on the water, watching it, harvesting from it. They know the best times to fish. They know how storm impacts the locations of fish. They have an understanding of this land that I can barely comprehend. They know things books don't teach. And to treat that type of knowledge as less than because it isn't accompanied by a degree isn't just wrong, it's upholding oppression. And to sacrifice people who have been historically marginalized under the guise of utilitarianism. Now, what is utilitarianism? There's an out-of-control trolley going down the rails heading towards 5 people, but if you flip the switch, it will hit just one. You have to choose, kill 1 to save 5? The answer seems simple, but is it? What if that one person was your best friend or your mom? You see, this is utilitarianism. It claims the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But what's the greatest good is not justice. And it does not care if that one person is your friend or your mom or a group of people who have been disenfranchised, who have had their land taken from them and who have been harmed for generations in the name of progress until so few of them survived. The trolley question was raised as a critique of utilitarianism, and the real answer to the trolley question is that there is no answer. There is no justice in this situation, but it teaches us that we must consider a number of variables to make informed decisions. Because if industry is allowed to expand rapidly with governmental agencies like FERC just rubber stamping things despite opposition, there will be collateral damage. The sad fact of the matter is we know, and knowing is not enough. We know the dangers of industry. First it was logging, then sugar, then petrochemicals and oil and gas. We know the faces change, but the extractive nature of the industries and the way they treat our beautiful state as a sacrifice zone remains the same. Right now, one of our biggest fights is against liquefied natural gas, or LNG. There are currently 17 proposed or in operation facilities. Despite claims that it is a cleaner fuel or bridge fuel, research shows it emits as much and sometimes more greenhouse gas emissions than coal. And that's if it's operating as it's supposed to. Recently, an industry expert dropped this quote at an LNG conference, as he giggled, that one at the top there. Someone said, I heard one of your tankers has, or if it were to explode, is the equivalent of one of the bombs that was dropped on Hiroshima. And he said, of course not. I have to correct you. That's absolutely not true. One of our tanks has the energy of 52 of the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima. And it's not just the expansion of exports either. It's also CCS. So CCS is carbon capture sequestration. And as you can see by this title here at the bottom, it's being proposed in Terrebonne Parish in Houma, my hometown. And CCS, in theory, is supposed to capture carbon dioxide before it is able to reach the atmosphere. And then they pressurize it and pump it into the ground, which sounds great because it's not getting into the air. But when this goes wrong, it can have detrimental effects. As we saw in Yazoo County, Mississippi, when after a heavy rainstorm, one of these pipes shifted and leaked, gassing a community. And these are not my words, but one of the police officers who responded to the scene said it was like people were zombies. They were stumbling around, foaming. And so it's enough. And I'm not saying that I think oil and gas should be banned entirely, and I'm absolutely not saying I want to see people lose their jobs. My own family works in the industry. What I'm saying is that while yes, oil and gas has become a part of our culture, just look at the Shrimp and Petroleum Festival and the company sponsorships of some of our most beloved festivals like Jazz Fest, but framing it as something that it always has been and always will be makes it feel intractable in a way that it's just not. Louisiana has historically been one of the largest producers of oil and gas, sugar, lumber, and will likely become the largest exporter of LNG, yet we are consistently among the poorest and least educated states in the entire country. We need to understand that the interests of large international companies and the banks that fund these projects are at odds with parts of our culture that are far older than the oil and gas industry here. We, as Louisianians have always done, will be forced to adapt. But it's up to us to decide how. And because I love a good quote, I'll leave you with this one by a rapper I love named Beat Diggs. He was talking about the gentrification of Oakland, but I feel like it fits all the same. Because violence perpetuates violence. And we've made a desert of the lands my ancestors inhabited for thousands of years. It's time to say enough. You cookie. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jessi. If we have any questions from the audience, or Maida, if there were any questions that were posed in the chat, if you can bring those to the front for us, we'd appreciate that. If you'd like to ask Jessi a question, please use the reaction down at the bottom of your screen with the raised hand, and that'll put you up to the top, just like Dr. LaFleur has modeled for us. So Gary, take it away.
Thanks for that presentation, Jessi. That was awesome. That's exactly what the Bayou Culture Collaborative was. That's what we built this for, to hear stories like yours. And I was wondering, that's exactly the kind of thing that I would like to teach my students at Nichols. But then what do you see as the next step? I almost feel like the time is right to make a change for Indigenous people, but how do you feel about that? It seems like it's gaining momentum, that idea is.
Yeah, I think one of the first steps is I'm going to tout a phrase that Indigenous people love to say is land back. I think one of the first steps is giving Indigenous people land, especially. So my tribe is not a federally recognized tribe, so we don't have a reservation or anything like that. We're a state recognized tribe. And I definitely think sovereignty comes from land ownership.
Makes sense.
Honora?
Yes, thank you, Jessi, for a fantastic presentation, and it's I'm very sympathetic to everything you're saying. We're all fighting the carbon capture here in Ascension Parish, where I live as well, with a big project that's being proposed. But I had a question for you. One of the things that many of the groups I'm in, they start off with a land acknowledgement and naming the Indigenous tribes whose land they're actually living on. And I know that has its own set of issues with just acknowledging and not doing anything about it. But I've been confused as to what tribes actually lived on the east bank of the river where I live in Ascension Parish. I know the Houma and the Bayou and the Choctaw all have some role in this area, but I was just curious if you could clarify that for me.
Loaded question, very loaded question. Yeah, we did have some. I have a map of Louisiana above my desk, and I was like, Ascension Parish. Okay, yeah. Yeah, loaded question. I can definitely drop a link in the chat to a website that kind of helps out with that. And I say loaded question because, there's always going to be like conflicting ideas about where people were, but also a lot of tribes whose name has just been lost to time. And so with land acknowledgements, I will do them and I will say that. But at the end of them, I like to say land acknowledgements are great, but it would be better if we gave the land back.
Any other questions for Jessi right now? Yes, Simone.
Thanks so much, Jessi. My question, it was so striking to hear the stories of folks who had the titles to their land stolen and or were misled. And I was wondering if there are any pursuits of legal action to using some of these stories, using some of the, if there are any surviving documents that point to the fact that this was, criminal action. Is there anything like that happening?
Not to my knowledge, and I will preface this by saying I am absolutely not a lawyer, and so I wouldn't even know how to begin with that. These are all just stories that I have actually found documented in books, but also I've just talked to my tribal elders about this. I have pulled some really old land records, but I mean, there's a signature. It would be really, really hard to prove for a document that's almost 100 years old that this wasn't actually the person they said it was. And so, yeah, not to my knowledge.
David?
Yeah, a great presentation, Jessi. I just wanted, before I have my questions, I just want to say, you talked about Angola, and it's even more tragically ironic how Angola got its name. Why it's named after the country of Angola.
Because that's where most of the people who were enslaved came from.
Yes, because it was a Mr. Isaac Franklin who had a plantation in if you go to Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee, that's where it all came from. He paid for one boat of 300 slaves from Angola and put him on his plantation there, and that's how he got his name. So it's even more, like I said, tragically ironic. But I just wanted to know if you're familiar with a book and a podcast that I've been reading and listening to lately. The book is called Great Power of Small Nations by yeah, right there, of course. Yeah. Great Power of Small Nations by Elizabeth Ellis. And talks about the early days of French colonization and what a total disaster it was for everybody, not only for the French, but for the native peoples there, but talking about how they were able to maintain power at first up until 1720. because they had this very loose confederation between all the different, the myriad tribes that were in the area at that time, which eventually worked to their disfavor. And they started bringing in more people, both from Africa and from Europe. And the other one is a podcast called Plot of Land. Oh, yeah, you need to listen to it. I don't know if anybody, some people shaking their heads. Louisiana's talked about in great length to it, and talks about all the different issues and land issues in general in the United States, how land is power, and how you take power away from people, you take their land away from them, by different means, whether it's, push him off to Oklahoma because nobody thought anything was worth anything over there. Whoops, we found out there's oil and gas, so let's wipe out the Osage and take their land.
Familiar.
So yeah, I mean that's their playbook, and they're still playing out of that playbook. So I just wanted to know if you're familiar with those two things, and also once again congratulate you. It's a great presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, I wrote them down and we'll listen to that.
Shauna.
Hi, thanks. It was a great presentation. I got a lot out of it. And I kind of want to follow up on Gary's question a little bit. I liked your answer to Gary's question, and like that, getting the land's the next step. So when I walk through to students through the story that you kind of walked through, I don't do it quite as well as you do, but when I walk them through the story, by the time I get to the point we all got to, the students in the class are all like, this is so unfair, this is terrible, and everybody's really united in that feeling. And then when I say, okay, all right, so everybody agrees, and I say, we'll all agree, this is really unfair. Yes. And then I say, okay, so the next step is we have to appropriate some of this land and give it back to Native American people. Then everybody goes, and there's just silence then. So I'm trying to figure out a way to get them past that. You see what I'm saying? And I'm looking for that step. How can I get them to more, I want this to work, and I want to have some practical ideas. And I know that nobody has this off the top of their head. I'm hoping this is some of the things that the working groups here can start working on. It's like what this would look like. But any thoughts of yours on this would be helpful.
Cool. I am yet to run into someone who really, really pushes back on that. But I guess one thing we can just say is we're not talking about Columbusing. We're not talking about leveling out somebody's suburbs and kicking people out of their home and being we discovered this. That's not at all what we're talking about. We are just talking about taking back some of the land that was rightfully ours to begin with, because as we have just said, land is power in this country. It's unfortunate, but that's the fact of the matter. And all we're asking for is a little bit more power, which should not be that people shouldn't be pressed about that. But yeah, maybe it is a question for a working group, because I'm kind of shook by that.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. It's just, that's the reaction. Students don't argue against it. They just get silent at that point.
Yeah, I'm not trying to kick anybody out of their home or anything like that.
I know.
I guess I'd be curious, what are their reservations? Because I think that would be a better way to tackle it. What are your concerns about us saying that or wanting that?
Maybe we could collect all their concerns. I do kind of do that a little bit. Maybe we could collect that and sort of see what those look like.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Mark?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question, but before that, I just want to piggyback on what you were just talking about. I was just started watching the series Reservation Dogs on Hulu.
So great.
And there's an early episode where this white couple is driving by this billboard, on the back it says, and the husband is asking the wife, so what does that mean? Do they want all the land back or just some of it? And the wife is just rolling her eyes can we talk about something else? So anyway, so that's that. There's that. But I guess my question is a little bit like Shauna's. I wonder if you have an ideas on how to speak to people's mindsets, because that quote you had from Carl Brassel about how the extraction of the cypress trees set the tone for the pattern of economic extraction of the land in Louisiana. And that's been made by others too, to explain, for example, why the oil industry was able to do so much oil exploration on the coast of Louisiana, whereas in Florida, they didn't get to do that. And it had to do, of course, with the beautiful beaches in Florida and so on and so forth, but also just the culture of extraction in Louisiana, which is so deep. So how does one speak to that to get people to see that there might be another way?
Yeah, that is definitely something I'm still working through, but that's kind of one of the reasons I always plug and the reason I say colony is because I don't think that mentality ever stopped. And that's one of the reasons I consistently pointed out in my presentation, like these companies aren't from here. Texas owned the company, Louisiana Land and Exploration. Like this is still happening. LNG is going to be exports. It's going to result in higher gas prices for people here. And it's going to poison our communities. And we're going to have to live with the impacts of this for companies and funders that aren't even from here. They don't even have to live with the consequences of that. And that's why I continue to use the term colony, is because a lot of these LNG facilities are funded by overseas banks. So like this LNG is being exported to sometimes China, sometimes Europe, but it's like, it just never stopped. It never stopped. People continue and companies continue to just extract and take from Louisiana while we have to live with the consequences. And that's also why I kind of plug, like, we are consistently one of the poorest and least educated states in the country. If we're doing that well, that should not be the case. But statistics do not lie.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Brooks.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for speaking truth to power in this powerful way. Just wondering if you have any thoughts about ways that we can amplify Indigenous voices of South Louisiana if we don't have that heritage ourselves, without, especially if we have our ancestors of colonizers, not through our own choices personally, but, is there, without centering ourselves, is there a way we could really amplify what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say amplify the concerns of Indigenous people. Like, there's my tribe, there's other tribes in Terrebonne and Bush and St. Mary and all these other parishes along the coast. I would say, look at what they're talking about, look at what they're concerned about, and do what you can to help address it. Like sometimes that's going to be LNG, sometimes in Terrebonne Parish, it's going to be CCS. There's going to be an Indigenous colleague of mine, Betty Billiot, who's also from Houma. Is going to probably be working on that a lot more. And just, amplify what Indigenous people are talking about and what their concerns are.
Thank you.
Maida, I wonder if there are any questions in the chat or anything that you would like to share with the full group that's coming.
Yeah, there is a little conversation going on in the chat. I've been encouraging people to raise their virtual hand and add back to it. For example, Honora asks, how would land back work in Louisiana, considering the issues associated with tribal recognition, and who would the land be given to?
Just because we don't have federal recognition doesn't mean we aren't a sovereign nation and don't, have infrastructure, because we very much do, as do the other tribes. And so I guess it would depend on who is actually giving the land, if it's like some wealthy funder or something like that, or just like the state. I don't know. I guess that would be very different dependent upon where it's coming from. But you don't need to be a federally recognized tribe to have land.
One thing I've been wondering about is how land banks might play into not only for the indigenous communities, but a lot of the displaced communities that are a lot of the communities that will be even more displaced in the future. Do you ever hear any talk about land banks?
Not particularly, no, but it'd be worth exploring.
Yeah, I've heard it mentioned at several national meetings, but somebody owns the land already. And so how do you get the land to go into the land bank? That's one of the primary strategies I've heard mentioned to address equity. But it's easier said than done, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Now, Margaret Pierce does ask, do you have any examples of land back from elsewhere in the United States? And Devin Parfait gives an example of one in California.
Thank you, Devin. Yeah, because I am drawing a blank right now. I know it has happened, but all these other statistics and dates in my brain right now, I'm drawing a blank on this one. So thank you, Devin.
I'm also thinking about what you said, Jessi, about Louisiana being one of the poorest, and we always rank last in terms of education. And I wonder what it is that we can do. I think, and that could be a part of what this group needs to do, and the working groups, is to have a strategy of how to work toward fixing that. Whether, because I personally, is that me meeting with my legislators to say this particular policy is hurting us, but I don't know which policy it is, and I don't know how to make that better, but I know that it's a problem. Do you have any direction that we could go in trying to address some of those larger systemic challenges for the state?
I can tell you an organization who you should follow, who is actually doing fantastic work on this, is Together Louisiana. If you go to YouTube and just look up why Louisiana stays poor, they can point to very specific legislation. And one of the big things that they primarily talk about is the tax cuts that we give industry. So they don't pay property taxes or something like that, which results in millions of dollars for every single one of these facilities that we are not getting in tax revenue, despite the fact that we are living with the pollution.
Correct.
And all of these other things and the harm that they're doing to our coast. Yeah. They just won't pay taxes, but they'll throw us a bone every once in a while, build a park or something. Be like, look what we're doing for the community. That I want everyone to see that is, they are just trying to get social license to operate in our state.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I want to add that there are quite a few other links that people have posted in the chat, and that I don't know that we can explore all of the issues today, but I encourage everybody to save the chat. If you don't know how, everyone can save it and explore these links, because there are probably about 5 or 6 other comments related to this in the chat.
Thank you for that. And so I'm going to take the screen share back, and one of the things that we like to do is ask our presenter, what is your hope for the coast? Because we have learned that without hope, there is no action. And so we try to stay as hopeful as we can. And so if you don't mind, tell us, what is your hope for the coast, Jessi?
I know I just said that statistic that we are one of the least educated states, but I also pointed out that education does not always necessarily mean knowledge. And I think I have lived here my entire life, born and raised in Houma. I think we're a lot smarter than what the statistics show. Yeah. And my hope is that we can learn to adapt in a way that maintains our culture, our beautiful Louisiana culture, all of it, not just the indigenous culture either, all of it, because people have lived here for thousands of years. as I've said time and time again. And settlers have lived here for hundreds of years. Like, this is not an easy environment to live in all the time. I walk in my backyard and I like get hauled off by mosquitoes. Like, I get it. It's not an easy environment to live in, but we've done it. And we've done it for a very long time by taking care of our environment a lot of times and understanding like the symbiotic relationship of all of this. And so my hope is that we will learn to adapt and make new things part of our culture that are better for our environment. Things like renewables. Like, that's, I know there's a lot of pushback on renewables, and I understand, but again, I don't want people in the oil and gas industry to lose their jobs. That's not what this is. But we do need to understand that we are going to have to adapt. Like, life's going to look different here. But I think if we do things to remediate what has been already done and stop new things from happening, like LNG and CCS, then that can go a lot further in mitigating some of these harms, and people can continue to live here for generations into the future, as we have.
Yeah, thank you for that. We really appreciate that. So next we'd like to talk, and well, thank you for a wonderful presentation, Jessi. That was very insightful. Thank you for answering our questions. We're definitely blessed to have had you with us for this gathering. So thank you so very much. So this brings us to the BCC position statement. Maida, were you talking about this, or?
Simone, are you here? Would you like to?
Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't see anybody in the room, so forgive me, Simone.
Oh, no problem. Yes, so we created a position statement with folks from the BCC last year. We created the statement to really capture our approach for preserving culture in coastal Louisiana, doing things like centering social justice and folks' rights to self-determination, sort of like Jessi was speaking about. So we're really proud of the statement, and we hope that folks, you go to the website, to louisianafolklore.org, take a look, sign on. You can sign on as an individual, or you can sign on if you're authorized to do so as an organization. For the folks that have already signed on, thank you so much. We ask, though, that send the position statement to friends, send them to folks in your network, coworkers, etc. We really, the more folks we can get this out to, then the more we can grow our reach and our impact. So one more thing, I'll just put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or any technical issues signing on to the statement.
Thank you so much for that, Simone. We also want to let everyone know that we've got our working groups that are meeting, and this shows you the dates. And I'll be giving you email addresses that you can email to the conveners if you would like to participate in these groups. What's of interest for the Culture and Coastal Planning Working Group, they will have Mr. Ray, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing, Cinnamon. Forgive me for mutilating that last name, but he's with the Louisiana Attorney General's office and the director of the Cemeteries Task Force, who will talk about the legal status of and protection options for cemeteries. This was something that was brought up in our meetings as something that is going to be really important as we face the challenges that are coming at us because of sea level rise and climate change threatening the existence of our sacred spaces. And so I look forward to that conversation, and I hope you all will be able to join as well. And again, the French language preservation group meets on Tuesday, May 9th at 2 p.m. And I'll give you, oh, David, would you like to mention something about that, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we are presently working on having an in-person meeting. Because, the Zoom is great, but I'd really like to see everybody's shining faces and get some ideas, because we like to have a planning session. Because we're working toward, and I might have mentioned this in some other meetings, that we want to have an actual summit where we can actually talk about where we want to go with French in the state. If we want to have more French immersion for children, French immersion for adults also. And we talked about the signage and whatnot, but we really wanted to have sort of like a summit. We'll do sort of like what's the word I'm looking for? And tour d'horizon. How do you say that in English? Look around the horizon. I don't know, just trying to get, because there's so many groups doing so many great things, but we're all siloed apart. So we're just trying to get different people from the different groups, from New Orleans, from Lafayette area, from Bayou, Terrebonne. There's so much going on. We just have to get ourselves all on the same page, and we're probably going to meet in Thibodeau as soon as we can all set a date very soon. Hopefully, we'll have a big summit. Sometimes I was shooting for the spring, but things get crazy. So by the fall, hopefully, we'll get something going.
Such a wonderful idea too. And what I love about the work of this group and all the other groups is that there are tangible things being produced out of these groups. It's not just coming together and having a conversation and complaining about things. These groups are actually doing really, really good work that's moving all of this forward. So thank you for being the convener of that group. And I definitely look forward to continuing to participate with that. The other groups that we have, Preparing Receiving Communities, that's with Haley and Tracy, and then Artists and Tradition Bearers with Lauren. And let me give you some of their information. So you can always email any of us, and if you don't have enough time to write down these email addresses, we can get that information for you and connect you to the people who are convening these groups. We would also like to announce that our next Bayou Culture Gathering presenter will be Miss Adrienne Skidmore-Thomas, who will be presenting on protecting the soul of Louisiana communities, an arts, culture, and humanities and equity initiative. And Ms. Thomas is with us from FEMA, and I think she's with us here today. So we definitely look forward to having you on Friday, May 26th at 12 noon. Please join us for that gathering. And so at this time, we'd like to open this up to anyone who has any announcements, if you would like to share with the group. Please just raise your hand virtually in the chat. And if not, then we can let you know that these are the ways that you can stay connected with us. Again, if you need someone's email address that you may not have been able to get, you can find information on Louisiana Folklore Society's website. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have those videos that we produced of our first year together with the gathering highlights, and then of course Zero's poem, which was extremely powerful. So,
and we're a small world. Zero is Adrian's cousin. I love that.
That's wonderful. That's what, yeah, I figured with Skidmore as a last name, I definitely wondered if they were related. So that's great. So again, thank you for being with us. We are here until 1:30 just to carry on the conversation. But this concludes the formal part of our presentation. And so we look forward to seeing you for next month.